What's up? You want some dirty secrets? Yes? Perfect, let's dive in. Welcome back to Bumblebee. I'm your host, Taylor McWaters. Here are the top 10 ancient secrets from lost civilizations you didn't know. Starting our list off at number 10, the first skull. Before we get into some mysterious happenings in history, we have to talk about the very first Neanderthal skull that was ever discovered. The discovery came about back in 1829. The skull was found in a cave near Angus, Belgium. Now at the time, they didn't even realize it was the skull of a Neanderthal. That knowledge came much later, around 1856. And at that time, quarry workers were ripping apart limestone in a Fedhover cave near the Germany city Dusseldorf. But this skull was found in Neanderthal, a small valley of the Dussel River. Yeah. Hence, the name, now we understand that. The skull was human, but it wasn't. This was game-changing. Number 9, medicine. You can only imagine the various injuries Neanderthals would have, hunting down a mammoth or, a bison 3 times the size of you. Odds are you're gonna get a bruise or two. So what did Neanderthals do at this point? Well, that's what this pile of bones is for. Yeah, it's so dark, right? How did Neanderthals live so long without a pharmacy? All that yelling, no halls, that's gonna hurt. Neanderthals' medical skills are pretty similar to what our ancestors did. Herbal remedies, baby, that's it, herbal remedies. They managed fevers, but when the pain got too bad, chewing on a specific tree may have helped tolerate the pain. So now when looking back to these piles of bones, we find fragments of these leaves in their, dental cavities. We could study their teeth and be like, yes, I can see what you had for lunch. This makes sense. 40,000 years before penicillin, Neanderthals were chewing on aspirin. They were brilliant. Little dirty secret there. Number 8. Ancient art. Okay, here's where we're at with Neanderthals and art. First of all, we don't have actual representational art, but we do have symbolism. That's pretty close, and also just as fascinating in my opinion, especially when they look like this. These are eagle talons, right? They're about 130,000 years old. They were found recently in the Krapina Neanderthal site in Croatia. Now researchers believe that they were part of a jewelry set, like earrings, or part of a necklace. I couldn't even make this now with the YouTube tutorial. You know what I mean? Yet somehow civilizations were crafting this thousands of years ago. 130,000 years ago. That's crazy. Number 7. The Indus River Valley Civilization. What's now modern Pakistan was one of the world's earliest societies ever. It was also referred to as the Harappan Civilization, or the Indus. And they were actually quite large. We often hear about Vikings and how, there were thousands of them, or the 300 Spartan warriors. Well, the Indus were in the millions. Aside from the other earliest civilizations, Egyptians and Mesopotamians, they were considered the most extensive. The world's first ever dentists came from the Indus Valley. Something way more interesting than dentist facts is that when compared to Egyptian ancient cultures, the Indus never built any palaces or temples, right? Meaning there were probably no priests or kings. But we still get to study ancient texts. Those are always fun and often confusing. The Indus Valley Civilization had a language that we're slowly but surely deciphering. But even so, there's around 250 to 500 characters that still remain a mystery. So, we can figure out what these guys ate thousands of years ago, but we have no idea what they were saying. Signs be hard. Number 6, Gobeckli Tepe. Just 6 miles from the ancient Turkish city Urfa, Gobeckli Tepe is 100,000 years old. And there are these massive stone circles created by a civilization that predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. We're convinced it's the world's oldest temple, a holy temple rather. This area in the world, now it may not be a spectacle, but thousands of years ago, you would be able to see the horizon in every direction from this point. You would also see herds of beautiful animals racing by. There'd be fields of barley, wild wheat. It would have looked like a temple from The Legend of Zelda. It was gorgeous and the landscape was fresh. Mind you, because it was so long ago. It was discovered back in 1960s. University anthropologists, they were doing a survey of the region, they found this place and assumed that it was an ancient cemetery and nothing more, and then continued on their merry way. Then cut to 1994, Klaus Schmidt was doing surveys for himself, found the same site, and knew right away from the first glance that this was man-made. Oh, imagine that. Imagine missing Gobeckli Tepe the first time and being like, the cemetery. Number 5, Anasazi. Before the first skyscrapers were built in the 1880s, the Anasazi built massive stone buildings on the side of cliffs back in the 12th century. Some of these walls housed up to hundreds of residents, right? Like a skyscraper, a building, like a condo, just in the wall. What's now present-day Mesa Verde National Park was pretty intense back in the earlier days. Scientists have uncovered some hints as to where these creative cliff builders disappeared to. Well, violence, that seems to be the common denominator here. Yeah, the thing that's still going strong today, well, thousands of years ago, back in the 12th century United States, long-term drought led to the Anasazi to violence, and perhaps they wiped out each other. Other theories suggest that the Anasazi had to abandon their massive homes around the 1300s and then travel south. Either way, these are so impressive to look at. Number 4. Ancient Vikings. I'm a big Assassin's Creed fan. When they announced Vikings as their newest installment, I was pretty excited. Then I started playing it and I was like, yeah, that's not great. I'm a big Norse mythology fan, okay? But what actually happened to Greenland's Vikings? That's the mystery. Well, around 985 AD, Eric the Red arrived with a large fleet to colonize the island, and of course was subsequently banished for manslaughter. So now we have 2 colonies on Greenland, a large eastern colony and a smaller western one. Now these Vikings didn't build massive pyramids, but instead they built stone churches that are still standing to this day. These Vikings were around for a few hundred years, and at one point in time there were 5,000 Vikings, give or take. Now that's incredible, but later on in 1721, a missionary expedition arrived and there were not 5,000 Vikings. In fact, there were no Vikings. Where did they go? Archaeologists did the digging and apparently the western settlement died off around 1400 AD. And just decades later, the eastern settlement was abandoned. Well, there's a handful of family fun movies that hint to what happened. The Ice Age. Yeah. Well, the small one in the 14th century at least is the biggest factor on where these Vikings disappeared to. Yeah, just a small Ice Age. Classic. That's haunting for a Canadian to hear. Number 3. Easter Island. Back between 300 and 1200 AD, Polynesians used canoes, not Carnival cruise ships, canoes to somehow travel all the way to Easter Island, over 2,000 miles away from Chile. Yeah, that feat in itself is impressive, but when you start really thinking about the Easter Island heads on the actual island, it gets even more impressive. The Easter Island Moai statues, keep in mind there were hundreds, reach up to 32 feet high, and they weigh over 82 tons. It was a sight to see. That was until the 1800s. That's when the civilization suddenly vanished out of nowhere. Many of these statues were also destroyed during this time. The population as well was decreased drastically, and the island's higher-ups, be it priests or chiefs, whoever, were all overthrown. Well, whatever happened may give us some ideas for the future. Easter Islanders cut down so many trees that before their seeds could even enter the earth again, rats ate them. So these guys simply ran out of trees, which means they ran out of rope or the ability to make more canoes. So they were trapped. So naturally, a civil war began alongside starvation. Plus the arrival of Europeans in 1722, they immediately wiped out most of the remaining Easter Islanders. And then around the late 1800s, waves of smallpox reduced the amount of island natives to just 100. It was brutal. Number 2, the Mississippians. We'll dial back the calendar now to 700 CE. Now at this point, before European colonization, the American Southeast was home to the Mississippians. Their main area was the city called Cahokia, which is now modern-day Collinsville, Illinois. And that's not large either, it's just 6 square miles. Now check out this photo of Monk's Mound, a now historic site. We look at ancient Egyptians and our jaws drop at the sight of those pyramids, plus their alignment with the stars. That's obviously, of course, fascinating. Well, Cahokia was once home to pyramids and large wooden structures as well. We're not exactly sure what happened to this 40,000 person civilization, but experts guess famine and disease were one of the many factors. And finally, number 1. Clovis. Taking a look at some mammoth hunters for our last point here. Now this civilization is considered the first inhabitants of the New World. Pretty intense stuff. Hunters would use what's called Clovis points to get their next meal. They would use chipped flint, and they had to hunt bison, mammoths, deer, anything that had skin to be used for shelter and or clothing. In fact, this 10,000-year-old civilization may have disappeared at the same time as mammoths. After all, with these historical beasts acting as both your gear and your food, yeah, eating them ought to do some damage down the road. Not even an ice age was included yet, and already they're running out of resources. Those are the top 10 ancient secrets from lost civilizations you didn't know. I've been your host, Taylor McWaters, and I'll see you next time on Bumblebee. Peace.